matter what's around you, to that place of 8 or 9 out of 10. Does anyone have any questions or comments before we move on about this particular PPI, the peak performance indicator? Or does anyone have a score they particularly like to share with the group? And if not a score, just a general direction.
Hi, Paul. Happy New Year.
Hey, Joe. Happy New Year to you.
Thank you. I just want to say I'm a 9 today. I have no idea why, except I had an incredibly good sleep last night, and it's the sun's shining, and it's just a fabulous day. So I'm probably close to a 10 today. So yeah.
Wow. Wow. Well, enjoy what that feels like and make note of what it feels like. But it is good if you can sort of maybe recognize and just reflect on what might have happened to get you there, because you've been pretty positive all of last year, but for you, you're noticing a difference for the fact you've called this out, and you're not there by accident. There would be things that have lined up. I mean, it might be unknown to you right now, but the more you're aware of what's around you, so it could be just the weather, it could be other, it could be sleep, and sleep's a significant one. It's not just about the mind strategies. We do need nutrition, we do need exercise, we do need rest and recovery. And so, could it also be with your ID, the start of a new year that's really positive and got a lot of hope within it that excites you? Could be a bunch of things, but it's good to know the ingredients so you can then be more, what's the word, proactive about keeping them in place.
It's a couple of new ideas just bubbling away as well. So,
okay.
Yep, it's all good.
It's interesting, even just having those ideas may be enough with your ID to just drive a lot more energy in you. And so even if they don't all, if you're not working on all of them, but they're just floating around inside you, it can be quite interesting, the difference it makes to your energy.
Yeah, totally.
Well done. Well done.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yes, I'd like to say something.
Hey, Judy.
Number one, I'm feeling so much better physically, which makes everything work better. I'm a 9 today.
Wow.
I have never been able to say I'm a 9 since I've been with you on these calls. Never.
Wow. That's
awesome. Yeah, it is awesome. Believe me. I'm glad you agree. But here's what some of the components. Number one, I've been able to accomplish a lot today. Some really important things. I've also been able to, because I feel better, I am more able to be who I really am, to express myself in the way that I'm really feeling. If I don't feel good enough to express myself, then my score goes down. I've also done a variety of things. Just usually, if I can get a win over here and a win over there and a win over here, all right, this is looking good.
Right.
And I've talked with my best friend. That always helps to have a conversation with her.
Right. Right. Good. Good. See, now what's lining up to get you there, and you hold on to those, and then with other days you can now be more proactive about making sure those things are in place. It is a choice. When people say to me with leaders, they'll say, well, that person, is lucky they're in a position where they're really successful, they're earning a lot of money, so no wonder they're happy and fulfilled. It's not like that at all. You talk to those leaders, they're very intentional about what they need to do to get in stride. Some of you remember Jesper Anderson, who was my first Game Changer interview last year. And I wanted to meet with Jesper yesterday, and I said, can we meet? And he goes, no, I need to work out, but you can meet with me after I've worked out, like they're very, I won't say disciplined, it's not the right word. They're just very intentional about, they know what they need to be at their best, and they make sure they do those things in amongst, the rest of their day. So they're always coming from their best place. All right, just in view of the time, I mean, we could probably stay on this topic for a long time. I'm going to move on and talk about resilience. So let me just dump this slide. Stop sharing for a minute. So, oh, Sorry. Okay, so when we think about resilience, you know, there's potentially a real connection to ID. It's a topic I've been talking about with a few people, but when I was just bouncing this around with Ian, we were looking at what do we want to cover for the new year. You know, we've all just started 2021 with probably a bunch of different goals and aspirations, and certainly an expectation, I think, a couple of months ago that this year was going to be better. And yet, for many people in the conversation we've been having, it's like, well, already it doesn't feel like it's actually going to be much better than last year. In fact, this is probably going to be the more challenging year. And so whereas they'd set themselves up with, you know, I can last till the end of the year, now they've got to dig deeper and potentially go again. And I say they, meaning all of us, we're all in this together. And so there are probably different ways to muster that resilience. And maybe they're not all related to ID, but I'm sure somewhere in there are, you know, some strategies and insights that relate to your ID. And I wanted to unpack that today. And if it actually needs more than today's time, we can deal with that, you know, in a future webinar as well. It doesn't all need to be dealt with today. But I wonder whether some of you have ways that if you feel particularly resilient and almost what's the invincible, you know, that level of like armor-plated resilience, what do you draw on to do that? So as an example, just to kick the conversation into play, when I spoke to one leader who I think is a remarkable leader, and in fact, I'd love to interview her for one of my game changer interviews. I've already planted the seed. I'm just waiting for the answer. She said to me, you know, for me, Paul, it all comes down to gratitude. I choose to find a way to see gratitude in things. And I'm wondering, is that it? Are there more things? I'd be really interested to hear what some of you guys have to share, not just for me, but for each other, on maybe where do you go to? What do you dig into to get the resilience? And can you see a connection with your ID?
Yeah, Paul, if I might go first. I don't tend to go for the eternal optimism. So, for example, I don't tell myself 2021 is going to be better than 2020, or this is going to be over by Easter. For me, it's just whatever it takes. And whatever it takes. And I definitely see an ID connection there. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that happens with an avoid improvise is they look at the risk and they know if they can handle the worst risk, everything will be better from there. So instead of the eternal optimism, they tend to look at the worst case scenario, because if they can deal with the worst case scenario, then they can steel themselves, and everything better than that is an easier quest. Thanks, Peter.
Hey, Paul, it's Grant. How you going? Happy New Year.
Hey, Grant. Happy New Year to you.
Yeah, I'd concur with the gratitude piece. That's something that I've only really deliberately focused on probably the last 12 months or so. And I think for me in 2020, as tough as that year was, having that deliberate focus twice a day, so morning and night, I think made a huge difference for me. And then closely linked to that is internally focused. So I've actually been doing a bit of studying on stoicism, and there's a guy that was a fighter pilot in the Vietnam War called James Stockdale, and he was a big fan of the Stoics. And there's a saying that came out of his experience in Vietnam that goes, when you're in an experience like he was a prisoner of war for 7 years after being shot down, and he was one of few people that survived. There was I guess an approach to that experience that he had that really demonstrates resilience, and it's the brutal facts, facing the brutal facts with the sureness of success. And he said that combination of facing the brutal facts but having a sense of optimism and a sureness of success is what got him through. He said he had optimists around him that drove themselves crazy and ended up committing suicide, and he had pessimists around him that lucky to last 6 months. And so he worked closely with a handful of prisoners that he could communicate with through whatever means he had around just facing the brutal facts. They're in a prisoner of war camp, but they had to have a sureness of success that they were going to survive. Otherwise, they'd end up like the pessimists.
Wow, interesting, very interesting, insightful. Thanks, Grant. Thanks for
No
sharing.
worries.
Hi.
Hey, John.
To me, all the stuff that happened last year with COVID is just an obstacle that I'm well capable of handling. And that's how I handled it. It didn't interfere with my career. And I was able to use whatever means and whatever openings I have to get through all these, whatever obstacles was put in my way. And that gave me more of a charge.
And did it not interfere, or are you saying that mindset allowed it to not interfere? Which came first, the chicken or the egg?
No, the career has been going in the right direction, and I'm probably at the highest I've been, and doing wonderful things and doing a lot of wonderful things from my point of view anyway. And very happy there. And COVID actually may have given it a little boost. So that didn't hurt either.
Well, that has happened for some people, some industries. It's been very interesting how, it's been quite polarizing, hasn't it, for many people? Thanks, John.
Yes.
Anybody else?
Yeah, Paul, can't resist mentioning the, and Grant mentioned Stoicism, but I read a book a while ago called The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Halliday. And I honestly see, and I have done, I think, through my life, that when you visit the fact that every challenge has an opportunity. So seeing an obstacle and having a challenge and getting around that is key. And I think that's aligned with gratitude as well. But also, I think the serenity prayer is great too. And the number of people that are trying to change what they can't change. And I think having the courage to know what you can, or having the knowing what you can change, knowing what you can't change, and having the wisdom to know the difference is key too, because we get so stuck on what we can't change, but there are things we can change. So I think that helped me a lot.
Thanks, Mike.
Paul, David here.
Hey, David.
Hi. I have to agree 100% with your opening comments about gratitude. And I think, Grant, I think everybody's referred to it. I use gratitude all the time, but I think from gratitude also comes strength, and it says, well, whatever it takes, and let's face the brutal facts here, and what are we going to do with it? So I don't think it's necessarily one thing, but for me, gratitude is the greatest gift that any one of us can ever have. You just realize how much worse things, it doesn't matter how bad things are, things could just be so much worse. What are we going to do about it? And yes, everything that everybody else has said sort of gets pulled together with it. So it's not one thing, but something has to tie it all together and link it back with you and your ID.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there are some like generic principles, like say gratitude is something, no matter what your ID is, everyone can practice that. But I do think there, and we can delve into them in a minute, and as I say, unpack them in future webinars. I think there are some, depending on your ID, like Peter sort of illustrated at the start, depending on whether you're like an improviser or an avoid improvise, there can be very different approaches that you have mentally for how you then deal with a challenge that allows you to either, have the resilience or not have the resilience. Like, where do you go to? I think will have a lot to do with your ID. Thanks, David. Gail, I think you're going to share something.
Yes, please. I agree totally with gratitude, but kind of for me, gratitude's where I am. Problem is, everything's where I am now. So when I wake up this morning, that's what today is. Maybe it's not a problem, but that's how it all is for me. So I appreciate that there's a pandemic. I appreciate that all my family in the UK, which is basically all my family, are in dire straits. And I appreciate that here we have been so very lucky. But at the end of the day, it's that's what it is. So you just get on and deal with it. And I appreciate some of my clients had to close their businesses and re-engineer themselves. But that's, it's just what it is. So I find it really difficult with my ID to just sit there and go, well, yes, because it's where we are. And so we just live with it. I remember saying, every miner says it's a good day when you're above ground. And I kind of think that that's, for me, life's good. You know, there are things going on that I can't control, but life's good and I work through them. And perhaps that's a little bit of a different perspective from people who are verifiers and avoid improvise. For me, it's just, yes, it's here and you go with the punches. So I thought I'd share that.
Well, I mean, again, with your ID, it's one that's anyone who's an avoid verifier is much more into acceptance rather than trying to either change it or see it as something's wrong. It is. So there's an acceptance that comes more naturally to those of you who are avoid verifiers, like you, Gail, and Trace and Joe, you know, Patricia, you know, those of you who have got that avoid verify drive, it is more your nature to then just think, okay, well, it is what it is. We need to deal with that. You know, and it's those of us who are the verifiers, they go, no, it's not right. You know, we need to fix it. It's a problem, or it's broken, or it's wrong. We need to fix it. And it isn't always the case.
Hey, Paul, Steve here. How are you?
Great, Steve. How are you doing?
Good. I'm going to throw out the word trust. So let me put that into context. So we all talk about change as the only thing that's constant. And a lot of people enjoy variety in things, so that comes along in change. But what does change do? It introduces a lot of unknowns. So then people are sort of, well, what's their capacity to deal with the unknowns? And therefore, they operate in a state of, I'm not quite sure. And I read a book called Conversational Intelligence over Christmas. And the word trust came out a lot. So if people go into mistrust, the author was saying that it activates other parts of the brain where you go into the fear, flight, and freeze mechanism. But if you're in a capacity of trust, then you work in a more creative and a positive and a constructive way. So when I put in the word trust, and Pete Kaiser talked a little bit about it at the front there, about trusting yourself. Trusting yourself, you've got the capacity to be able to manage the change, the uncertainty. And where does the ID come in at? Well, I look at the strength of my ID. I shared some things last year where I'm low and improvise, and that annoys me, but I've also learned to make decisions quickly and get on with things. So understanding the strengths and the things that will take me out of stride or take me off my game, understanding those things when they come along and working to understand that, be aware of it, keep on going, make decisions. So for me, the word trust, but it's trust back yourself, trust in your own capabilities, and understand those strengths to be able to make those tomorrow better, because change is going to be here. What's after COVID? There's bound to be something else next year and the year after. So it's one of those things coming along.
Well, it's again interesting, Steve. Thank you for sharing. It's a great perspective. I love that you introduced that concept of trust. You know, but as I hear you talk, and same for some of the others, I can hear it coming through your ID as well. You know, that in a time of uncertainty and challenge and turmoil, someone with your ID, that strong, complete, avoid, improvise, does want stability and certainty and, you know, some level of predictability around how things might go. And so it will be your nature, as opposed to someone who's got the opposite ID to you, will be saying, well, I know this sounds really weird, but I'm actually excited by all of this stuff. You know, like they're not looking for the stability and the certainty. They're thriving on the fact that it's, you know, unpredictable and God knows where it'll go, and our backs against the wall and we might lose this, or some of the change might get invoked, you know. So your principles around trust and going with the knowns, you know, what do you know? Well, you know your history, you know you're a survivor, you know you've got resource and that you are resourceful. All of those thoughts just shore up the mindfulness around, I can do this. You know, there's a certainty and a predictability around my own capability, rather than the predictability of what's going to happen. I'm predicting that no matter what happens, I'm capable of dealing with it. And that gives you that solid grounding that someone with your ID needs to have to be at your best.
Yeah, very good. For good summary.
it's like trusting yourself is what you need
Yeah.
to then be solid. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just the unpredictability in my opening comment about, we'll talk about the only constants change, and knowing where I want things stable. That's just not my world. Like I was on the phone call to Chennai last night, and Chennai is in total lockdown, and lots of how do we deal with that and get productivity out of Chennai? Yeah, it's just things you can't control. So therefore, okay, I can't control it, but how can we make it work? So it's an opportunity to become creative. And this is where I sort of back yourself was, what are the options? How do I resolve things? And yeah, there is an excitement and in the challenge in that stuff. And I do enjoy that part of it. It's one of the things that draws me to what I do is the challenge, the unknowns, and yeah, prepared to sort of give it a go, see how we come out the other side.
Yep.
Paul. Hi, Paul.
Hey, Trace. How are you? How's Hawaii?
Hawaii's great.
Good on you.
Can't complain. It was interesting when you asked this question, because I was like, what really makes, I consider myself quite resilient, right? And I think my idea is quite resilient, but I was like, where is that coming from for me? And I think it comes from 3 places, but the most important one is like a belief that everything happens for a reason. Like, I think when I get really down, as in like, why is this happening? Not this again, or something's like really bad. Like, I grab my resilience from a belief that like, okay, everything's happening for a reason. This is happening for a reason. So I don't even try to figure out what the reason is. I'm just like, okay, so let's accept that. And it goes back to David, I think, and Mike, who was talking about acceptance, which is a big thing for me, is like, I'm going to accept what it is, not going to try to change it or make it different, but I just believe that it's happening for a reason. So that, I think that is probably the biggest piece for me about resilience. And then the other one, so it'd be belief, acceptance, and the third one would probably be like hope and positivity, right? Like, I find like I'm resilient when and it makes sense for my ID, right? But like, I'm resilient when I don't expose myself to negativity. So with everything that's going on with COVID, like, look at me, I moved to Hawaii, which has the least amount of cases in the US. I like don't put myself around anybody who talks about it negatively. If somebody brings it up on a conversation, I like leave the conversation. Like, I don't watch the news. I mean, I'm informed about what's going on, but I don't expose, somebody says, oh, what about the long term, somebody gets sick and then they get better. And it's like, oh, I hope they don't get the long term. And I'm just like, stop telling me about all the negative things that could happen. So there's this piece about exposing myself to all of that. And I try to keep very thoughtful about who I expose myself to, what information I expose myself to. And maybe I'm in a bubble sometimes when I shouldn't be, but I really try to limit my exposure to anything that is like super negative. And that helps me stay resilient, because if I hear all the negativity, I can get very drawn into that too.
Brilliant, Trace. Brilliant. I mean, just listen to the amount of intention around all of that. And you're a great example of what I was just saying about other leaders. So no matter what all the noise and the stuff is, they first and foremost take charge of what they need to be at their best and on their game. And you're hearing it right there from Tracy. And you're sort of leading into a couple of other areas I was going to get into as well, Trace, other than gratitude, but well done. And when I hear, again, listening from the lens of your ID around not only the hope and optimism, but the way you keep negativity out very proactively, it's very true with your ID. And it's taking charge of that so that you make sure that that's the case. Otherwise, we're all exposed to negativity, but if you don't know it's something you need to stay away from, you end up absorbing it without realizing, in the same way that an avoid improviser can absorb other people's pressures and problems, which was one of my big learnings from you guys last year. And yet they weren't yours to take on board in the first place. And there are so many people in that frontline worker capacity who are going to work even today with the intention of solving everyone else's problems and giving all of their self to, help people get better and stay alive and so on. And yet they're inadvertently, if they don't know how to protect themselves, they're absorbing all of that stress that leads to, all sorts of very serious consequences for them, probably the least of which would be something like PTSD. So, I think it's really, you're a great example of how resilience for most people comes best when you're really self-aware and are proactive about addressing your needs, some of which are based on your ID and some of which are philosophical. In fact, just in light of the time, I'll share a couple of my own learnings with you around resilience. I think the go-to place is gratitude. But when there's something like that comes into my head sort of easily, and I hear it as the reactive answer from some people I have a lot of respect for around their self-awareness, I sort of immediately say to myself, okay, that's the white belt answer. You know, that's like first level. It's a go-to. It will help us out. But is there something deeper? And I've actually found there are 3 levels. And then I look for what I would call the black belt level, which is like very few people maybe have this, but it's where we'd all like to strive to get to. And I like to share, I'm not saying I'm right, I just want to share with you some thinking around this in case it helps you and opens up a greater discussion. And the lady that I mentioned before that told me about gratitude, she's someone I have enormous regard for. Hopefully you will get to meet her, and I'll fess up who it is in due course. But when she gave me her answer, I said, well, that's the white belt answer. You know, let's come up with something more. And I'm still waiting to hear where she goes. But where my mind went to was where Tracy went to around there are certain principles. I think there are principles that the people I see that are really resilient, they live by certain principles. And to Steve's point, they have trust in those principles. So whether it's a case of everything happens for a reason can be a principle, whether it's no pain, no gain as a principle, that, you know, everything that I'm going to have in life has got to have a struggle. So on the other side of the struggle is some type of outcome that's positive. For me, it's the whole belief of Easter, you know, that you can't have a Sunday without a Friday. That's a principle that you live by. But another one that I think is really profound is that life is actually perfect. The way that it is today is actually perfect. For all that we might think it's wrong and off track and not working and it's all distorted, is only because of a view that we have of how it should have been. And as I've done more study about myself and about life and so on, one of the things that I'm finding very interesting is that, and I read this years ago, by the lady who was married to John Gray, who wrote Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, Barbara DeAngelis, and she wrote, life is perfect. Our role and our challenge is to accept it. And I find myself now, and you know, practicing this for many years, if I'm going along somewhere and something goes wrong, what I think is wrong, it's only because I assigned the wrong to it. So let's say I'm on my way to the airport and I get a flat tire and I'm going to miss a plane. Like, that's not something going wrong. How do I know that if I'd have not got the flat tire, I wouldn't have had a head-on collision and something could have been a disaster? So in fact, Susie and I just went away, you know, with all the kids and everything over the holidays. We were camping on the way down, our car broke down and we've ended up being towed home on the back of a massive big flat top trailer, and they're towing the van. You know, although it feels like everything went wrong, I mean, we actually still had an amazing holiday and everything, but it's quite interesting when you say, well, nothing actually went wrong. That if someone said to us, what's going to happen is your car's going to break down, you're going to get towed home on the back of a trailer. Like, if we'd have even had that as our plan, we would have said, well, everything played out perfectly, you know, but we just had a different original expectation. And here's really the rub. One of the things I learned from some of my own growth last year was not only is life perfect, but your life is the way you designed it to be. But you don't necessarily know what that design is. If someone came to you tomorrow and said, or today, and said, here's the book of your life, you want to know what's going to happen tomorrow, do you know what's going to happen next week, you know, next year? None of us would really want to know what's going to play out. But if we've got this definition about what should and shouldn't happen if it was to be right and perfect. And I find it really quite phenomenal to say, so my car broke down, or this went wrong in that relationship, or something else happened. So I designed that, did I? Okay, that's interesting. Wonder why I did that. What am I meant to learn from this? And what I find about life is everything happens purely and simply because it's a source of learning and growth towards making us more whole as a human and more as a full spirit. They say we're a human being having a spiritual experience, or a spiritual being having a human experience. And the more people grow and develop, they realize they're a spiritual being having a human experience. And I think learning about that dimension gives you where I got to was, the more you have self-acceptance that life is perfect, the less you actually need resilience. So for me, it was like, discipline's what you need when you don't have motivation. There are plenty of people that aren't disciplined to go and work out every day. They're motivated to work out. They want to do it. They're not struggling to get there. They want to get there. And I think when you have a principle around life is actually the way I designed it to be. It is perfect. This is what I want. It's just not what I was expecting right now, but I'll figure that out. You don't actually have to draw on resilience. You draw on your curiosity. And curiosity for life is a much more profound and powerful and positive way to approach each and every day, especially the struggles, than it is trying to muster up resilience. So I think that's more of a challenging approach. I think it's more black belt, but I wanted to share that with you in case, separate to unpacking each instinct, there are some more generic insights in that might help you, think about how you approach 2021 from a place of, curiosity, and that your life is actually brilliant. And COVID was meant to happen. I don't know exactly why yet. I don't know what all the benefits are, but I know when we get 5 and 10 years down the track, we'll look back and go, it was actually, doesn't mean there wasn't a price to pay, but in terms of the bigger picture of the universe, we'll all be better for it. And like Grant, you said, when you've got that principle of what do you call it, face the brutal facts with the sureness of success. I think those sorts of principles give you that sureness that this is all going to be perfect. Wow, that's right on time. Didn't plan it to be that good. I'm definitely not that good at planning, but we're right on the top of the hour, guys. So we can spend some more time. If this is a topic you'd like to dig into and learn more about in terms of the nuances of the different IDs, we can do that. In the meantime, stay curious, accept what's going on, and look for how you can grow personally from it. And above all, stay in stride with your ID. If you need help doing that, please reach out, and I'll extend our offer by 1 more week. For those of you who want to follow through and nudge the people that you might have invited to get their IDs done, let's see what happens in the next week. And if anyone is new to that and you maybe missed out, because I saw someone ask that in the chat, I think Steve, you asked that, reach out and we'll give you the benefit of that gift and see what you can do in a week. Have a great week, everybody, and thanks for being here today. Welcome to 2021. I look forward to sharing the year with you. All the best.
Thanks, Paul.